The day I found strangers fishing off my dock like they owned the place, I knew something was off. "Hey," I shouted, walking down from my back porch, coffee in hand. "This is private property." One of the teens looked up, shrugged, and said, "My uncle said it's fine." "This is our spot now." I blinked. "You're what?" That's how I learned the HOA President Teresa Caldwell, Queen of the Clipboard and Destroyer of Joy, had decided my lakefront property was no longer mine. Apparently, she'd reclassified the shoreline behind my house as community recreational space, without asking me, without telling me. And then she gifted it to her niece's family, who had just moved into a house 5 lots down. I'm Roman Pierce. I've lived in this neighborhood for 7 years. Paid for this lot because it backed right up to the lake. I even built the dock myself after getting the proper permits. Teresa had signed off on them 5 years ago. Now she was pretending that never happened. I went straight to the next HOA meeting. The community center was half full, mostly the same crew of retirees and nosy neighbors. Teresa stood at the front like some dictator holding court. Her bleach blonde bob looked sharper than usual, and she wore that smug expression she always had when she thought she was the smartest in the room. I walked straight up to the mic. "Why is my lakefront being used by strangers, Teresa?" She didn't even flinch. "Roman, the HOA board voted to open up limited access to the lake. You've had private use for years. It's only fair we let others enjoy the water." I stared at her. "Fair? You didn't even tell me. You gave access to your niece's family. That's not fair, it's shady." Gasps from the crowd. Teresa's lips tightened. "I followed every rule when I built that dock. You approved the permits." She waved a hand. "That was before we updated the bylaws." I narrowed my eyes. "What bylaws?" Teresa's second-in-command, some guy named Dennis, who always looked like he was just happy to be sitting near her, held up a packet. "Amended rules, passed last month. Section 12 says the HOA can reassign common access zones at its discretion." "That's not what my deed says," I replied, "and the property lines haven't changed." I left the meeting steaming. I wasn't letting this go. That night, I pulled out every document I had: property deed, HOA bylaws, the lake rights paperwork, emails from 5 years ago with Teresa's signature approving my dock. Then I went to the county records office the next morning. Turns out, Teresa hadn't filed any changes with the county. The property line still ended exactly where it always had, right at the edge of my backyard. The lakefront was mine. She had no legal right to assign it to anyone, so I did what any reasonable man would do. I built a fence. A big, beautiful 6-foot wooden fence that ran the length of my backyard, right up to the dock. Clean lines, lake views blocked, and a sign that read, "Private property trespassers will be reported." 3 days later, Teresa showed up while I was hammering in the last panel. "You can't do this," she snapped, storming across the lawn in her leopard print flats like she owned the planet. I leaned on the post driver. "Can and did. You're violating HOA policy." I gestured to the paperwork spread on my patio table. "County records say otherwise. This land's mine." "You overstepped." Her face reddened. "You're causing division in the community, Roman." "No, Teresa. You did that when you thought you could hand off private property like it was a birthday present." She stormed off in a fury, but not before shouting, "You'll regret this." I almost laughed. I didn't regret anything, but I knew she wasn't done, and I was ready. The morning after Teresa's tantrum, I found a bright orange violation notice duct taped to my front door. Not slipped into the mailbox, not left gently on the welcome mat. Duct taped right across the glass like some kid pulling a prank. The paper listed 4 alleged violations: unauthorized structure, visual obstruction, non-compliant signage, and my personal favorite, hostile landscaping practices. I had no idea what that last one even meant, but there it was, written in all caps, no signature, no date stamp. Just a demand to remove all unapproved modifications within 72 hours. I pulled it off and walked straight back to my workbench in the garage. I kept a file for moments like this. I added the paper to it, then opened a new document on my laptop and started writing. By the time the sun was overhead, I'd submitted a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board, citing my lot's parcel ID and documenting the exact coordinates of the fence line using county GIS maps. I included time-stamped photos, the building permit number from 5 years ago, and a notarized statement from the original surveyor confirming my boundary rights. I copied the county zoning office and the HOA's legal rep, who, until now, had probably been enjoying a quiet retirement. The next afternoon, I received a letter from the city code inspector's office. Not a warning, just a polite request to schedule a property visit. That told me what I needed to know. Teresa had gone behind the HOA and filed a complaint directly with the city. She was escalating. I didn't flinch. I invited the inspector over that weekend. His name was Walt. Late 50s with sunburned cheeks and a quiet way of walking like he'd seen too many people try to bluff him. I showed him the fence, the permits, the survey, everything. After 15 minutes of poking around with a measuring wheel, he folded up his clipboard. "Well, Mr. Pierce, this is about as by the book as I've seen. You even used the right setback measurements. I'll file a report clearing the complaint." "Appreciate it," I said, walking him back to his truck. He paused before climbing in. "Between you and me, I've been out here 3 times this month. Same person filed every complaint, always vague, always anonymous, but the handwriting's the same." I nodded. "Let me guess, blocky cursive, all caps." He glanced back. Bingo! So Teresa had been filing complaints under fake names. That crossed a line. I called a friend of mine, Hannah, who worked at the district attorney's office. We'd gone to college together. She wasn't the kind to offer favors, but she didn't like bullies, and she really didn't like misuse of public resources. I sent her copies of the complaints Walt had forwarded me, plus the violation notice and a timeline of events. She called me back the next morning. "Roman, this might be something," she said. "If she's impersonating residents or submitting knowingly false reports to a government entity, that's criminal." "How criminal?" "Filing a false report is a misdemeanor, impersonating a resident to influence a code enforcement action. That could be bumped to a felony depending on intent. And if she used HOA funds or resources to do it, that opens a whole other can of worms." She asked for a few days to pull records. I waited. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was starting to notice. 2 houses down, my neighbor Louise, a retired nurse who mostly kept to herself, stopped by while I was watering the front shrubs. "I heard about the fence," she said, glancing toward the backyard. "Good for you. That woman's been overstepping for years." I raised an eyebrow. "You've had run-ins." She fined me for having a wind chime once. Said it violated the noise comfort clause. I didn't even know that existed. I took it down, but I never forgot it. That got me thinking. If there were others like me, maybe it was time to start comparing notes. I printed a simple flyer. "HOA concerns, let's talk." I listed a time and date, Saturday afternoon, my driveway, and taped it to the community bulletin board near the mailboxes. No pitch, no drama, just an open invitation. 13 people showed up, some brought lawn chairs. Others just stood around sipping lemonade or iced coffee, and every single one had a story. She cited me for planting tulips outside the color palette. She wrote me up for parking my car 3 inches over the sidewalk. I measured it. I tried to run for the board last year. She disqualified my application because I lacked leadership presence. By the time we were done, I had a legal pad full of handwritten grievances, dates, and screenshots of violation notices. Some of them were petty, some were clearly retaliatory. But a handful, particularly the ones involving forged signatures on meeting minutes, were serious. That night, I scanned everything and sent it to Hannah. She called me the following Tuesday. This time, her tone was sharp. "Roman, we pulled some of the HOA's filings. Teresa's been submitting altered meeting records to the county. There are discrepancies in the signatures. Some of the homeowners who voted on policy changes weren't even present. That's fraud." "Yeah, and the kicker. She listed her niece as a voting member on the last session, even though she wasn't eligible yet. That's how she pushed through the lake access change. It's completely invalid. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. So what happens now? I'm forwarding this to the county investigator. But you might want to call a special meeting. If the board removes her before we file charges, they can avoid being named in the suit. I didn't waste time. Using the signatures from the group that met at my driveway, I filed a petition to call a special HOA meeting. The bylaws required 1/5 of homeowners to trigger it. I got over half. When Teresa received notice of the meeting, she tried to block it, claimed the petition was invalid. But the HOA's own secretary, an older man named Glenn who'd been quiet for years, finally stepped up. "I'm tired of watching this happen," he said during a phone call. "If you need someone to verify those signatures, I'll do it." 2 days before the meeting, a sheriff's deputy knocked on Teresa's door with a subpoena. I watched from my porch as she opened it, still in her robe, and nearly dropped her coffee. She slammed the door without saying a word. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. People who hadn't attended a single HOA event in years showed up early, some with folders, others with printed screenshots. Glenn opened the meeting and handed me the floor. I didn't waste time with speeches. I projected the altered meeting minutes on the wall, side by side with the originals that homeowners had photographed at the time. I showed the forged signatures. I presented the code complaints linked to her handwriting. I read a statement from the city inspector. Then I passed the microphone to Hannah, who had come in person, blazer and all. "I'm here in an unofficial capacity," she began, "but I can confirm that an investigation is underway. Anyone with documentation is encouraged to submit it directly to the county. If you've been fined unlawfully, there may be grounds for reimbursement." The room went silent, then erupted into murmurs. Teresa stood up in the back, red-faced, eyes darting. "This is a witch hunt. Roman is trying to take over this neighborhood." I turned to her. "I'm just protecting what's mine, something you should have done instead of abusing your position." A motion was made to remove her as president. It passed. Unanimously, she stormed out, muttering threats over her shoulder. No one followed her. The next morning, her niece's family had a moving truck in their driveway. By noon, they were gone. As for the lake access, I planted a row of shrubs along the fence line, not to block anyone, just to mark for good where the line had always been. By the following week, Teresa's name had been scrubbed from the HOA's website. Her bio, her photo, even the president's message she'd updated monthly since 2019 gone, like she'd never existed. But just because she was no longer in charge didn't mean the fallout was over. Glenn, the former secretary, had stepped in as interim chair while the board scheduled a new election. He wasn't much for speeches, but he had one thing going for him: he was meticulous. At the first post-removal board meeting, he arrived with a wheeled crate full of binders. It took him nearly 15 minutes to place everything on the table. "This," he said, adjusting his glasses, "is the last 4 years of HOA activity, every fine, vote, and variance request logged under Teresa's tenure." I leaned forward from the third row, arms crossed. I wasn't the only one watching closely. Dozens of homeowners filled the room, each of them holding some version of the same question. How deep did the damage go? Glenn opened one binder and pulled out a sheet. "Here's a landscaping fine from March last year, issued to a Mr. Bradley for an unapproved garden gnome. There's a charge of $75. He held up another page. "And here's the board's official record of that date. No meeting, no vote, no discussion." Bradley stood up from the back. "She made me pay in cash. Said she didn't want to clog the account with small amounts." Glenn nodded. "We found 42 similar entries, fines issued with no board approval, no receipts, and no trace in the HOA's financial ledger." Someone let out a low whistle. Another neighbor, Eileen, raised her hand. "I paid $100 for supposedly exceeding the lawn height limit. She said she'd waive the violation if I paid by check directly to her." Glenn didn't blink. We've confirmed at least 12 checks made out to her personally. Some were deposited through a private account under a different last name, Caldwell. I spoke up. That's her maiden name. She used it when she ran a short-lived staging company 3 years ago. I looked into it back when she tried to cite me for having a trailer in my driveway. Glenn wrote it down carefully. We'll include that in the audit. After the meeting, he approached me in the parking lot, clipboard tucked under his arm. I found something else, he said quietly, lowering his voice. There's a set of emails Teresa sent to a title agency last fall. She tried to register an easement over your dock, claimed it had always been part of the community path. I felt my jaw set. She tried to rewrite the property map. She submitted a photo of your backyard, cropped to remove the fence line, claimed the dock was community built. Did it go through? No, the agency flagged it because the parcel records didn't match. But it's enough to show intent. That was all I needed to hear. I forwarded the emails to Hannah. She didn't wait this time. The following morning, she walked into the sheriff's office and handed over a full report. Altered property documents, misappropriated funds, impersonation of residents, and unauthorized use of HOA power for personal gain. The evidence was enough for a formal investigation. 2 days later, a warrant was issued. By the time deputies arrived at Teresa's house, she had already tried to skip town. Her SUV was packed. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as officers led her down the porch steps. She didn't resist, but her face was pale and her hands shook as they cuffed her. The charges were serious: fraud, falsification of public records, attempted property theft, and embezzlement. On top of that, the DA added obstruction for her false code complaints. A few of us gathered outside the community center that evening. Glenn stood beside an easel with a map of the neighborhood. We'll be holding a full audit. Any homeowners affected by Teresa's actions are encouraged to submit documentation. We're working with county officials to reverse any fraudulent filings. I stepped forward. What about the families she targeted, the ones who paid fines they didn't owe? We're creating a reimbursement fund, Glenn said. The board will vote to release reserve funds to cover it. And we'll be filing a civil suit against Teresa to recoup the rest. It wasn't just cosmetic. Change was happening. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. A forensic accountant was brought in to trace every dollar that had flowed through the HOA during Teresa's reign. The results were staggering. Over $17,000 in unexplained withdrawals. Dozens of violations that had been fabricated to pressure residents. In one case, Teresa had fined a widower for non-conforming exterior lighting simply because he'd installed a motion sensor by his garage. The man hadn't contested it at the time. He was grieving, and Teresa had warned him that fighting the fine would delay community services for his block. She'd said it with a smile, apparently. He'd believed her. Now that fine was voided. And he was one of 23 residents who received formal apologies from the board. The biggest shock came when the auditor uncovered a hidden account one that didn't appear anywhere in the official books. Labeled HOA Event Fund, it had been opened under Teresa's name but linked to the association's tax ID. Inside, just over $9,000. When asked to explain it, Teresa's attorney said she'd used it to streamline coordination of social gatherings. But no such events had ever occurred. There were no invoices, no vendor receipts, not even a flyer. The court didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. At her arraignment, Teresa pled not guilty. Her lawyer argued that she had simply made administrative errors and had always acted in the community's best interest. But the evidence was too detailed, too deliberate. The judge denied bail. I attended every hearing. Not out of revenge by then. I'd already moved on from the fence, the dock, the lake. I just wanted to be there when accountability arrived. At the final hearing before the trial, the prosecutor offered a plea deal. 5 years probation, full restitution, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. Teresa refused, so it went to trial. The courtroom was packed. Residents came in shifts, taking time off work just to see justice delivered. Glenn testified. So did Eileen, Bradley, the widower, and even Walt, the city inspector. Hannah presented the documentation like a seasoned litigator. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. She thought she could take something that didn't belong to her and hide it behind rules she made up. That's not governance, that's theft. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. 18 months in county jail followed by 3 years probation. Mandatory restitution. Community service, but the biggest consequence wasn't the time. It was what followed. Her niece's family, now living 2 towns over, filed a complaint of their own. Turns out, Teresa had used HOA funds to pay their moving expenses, claiming it was a community relocation incentive. They weren't charged, but they were forced to return over $2,000. Back in our neighborhood, things changed fast. The new board was elected with Glenn as president. They rewrote the bylaws with full homeowner input. Every meeting was now streamed online. All violations required photographic proof, and any board member caught issuing citations without a documented vote would be removed immediately. The fence stayed up, not as a barrier, but as a reminder. One afternoon, months later, I was sitting on my porch when a teenager walked up. He was maybe 15, holding a tackle box and looking sheepish. "Hey, my dad said you used to have people fish off your dock. I know it's private and all, but is it okay if I try the other end of the lake?" I pointed across the water. "That side's public access. Go ahead, some good base over there," he nodded, relieved. "Thanks." As he walked off, I leaned back in my chair. We'd survived a storm disguised as a neighbor. And somehow, we'd come out clearer, stronger, and far more united than before. And Teresa? Well, she finally got that time away from the neighborhood she always claimed she needed. 3 weeks after the trial, I received a letter not from the HOA, not from the county, but from a federal agency. Specifically, the Office of the Inspector General. It was plain, white paper with a government seal and a case number in the top right corner. The letter informed me that during the investigation into Teresa's financial misconduct, a federal housing grant linked to our HOA had come under scrutiny. Apparently, 2 years prior, the board under Teresa's leadership had applied for a federal community improvement grant. The funds were meant to upgrade stormwater infrastructure near the southern trail that bordered the lake. The application included forged public meeting records, a falsified environmental impact assessment, and according to the letter, at least one non-existent contractor. That contractor, a company called Greenpoint Designs LLC, listed as the sole bidder for the drainage project. A quick search told me everything I needed to know. Greenpoint had a single point of contact, a P.O. box in a neighboring county, and no website, no business license either. I forwarded the information to Hannah, who had stayed in touch after the trial. She didn't say much over the phone, just that she'd pass it to the right people. Within a week, federal auditors were combing through the HOA's bank records again. Glenn notified homeowners in a letter that the association would be cooperating fully and that all members would be kept informed. He also called an emergency meeting not in the usual community center, but in the local library's public auditorium. The place had better lighting and, more importantly, a podium with microphones for recording. That night, the room buzzed with low conversation until Glenn stepped up front. He looked more tired than usual, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has opened a formal investigation into the misuse of federal grant funds by the prior board. Specifically, the submission of false documentation and the redirection of grant money to a shell company. Every head in the room turned. No one spoke. Glenn continued. As of this week, a federal subpoena has been issued for all HOA financial records from the past 4 fiscal years. A forensic accounting team will be conducting interviews with board members and reviewing all contracts. "How much money are we talking about?" someone asked from the third row. Just over $36,000, Glenn answered. None of it went to the trail upgrades. There's no sign any work was ever performed, a voice from the back. And Teresa signed off on all of it. Glenn didn't hesitate. Yes, the board voted unanimously to freeze all discretionary spending until the investigation concluded. They also authorized the hiring of an independent legal consultant to represent the HOA during the federal review. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, 2 plainclothes agents showed up at Teresa's former home, which had been listed for sale since her arrest. They didn't find her there, she was still in county custody, but they did seize a fireproof safe from the back of a closet. Inside were printed invoices from Greenpoint Designs, all marked paid, with fake signatures from board members who had never even seen the documents. One of those board members, a quiet woman named Felicia who had resigned 2 years ago citing health reasons, came forward after the news broke. She contacted Glenn, and the two of them met with federal investigators. "I tried to question the grant process," she said during a closed-door session attended by board members and investigators. "But Teresa told me if I kept pushing, she'd have the board vote to remove me for non-compliance. She said I didn't understand the paperwork." Felicia's testimony, combined with the false contractor trail, was enough to bring the case to a federal grand jury. Teresa, already awaiting trial for the state-level charges, was now facing federal charges for grant fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Meanwhile, the HOA had work to do. The board appointed a new treasurer, someone with actual accounting experience, and hired a CPA firm to conduct quarterly audits going forward. They also passed a new bylaw requiring that all contracts over $5,000 be approved in a public vote with full homeowner access to the documentation. That was good news. But there was still one issue hanging over our heads: the lake itself. Because of the fraudulent grant submission, the HOA had been flagged for compliance review. That meant any future applications for government funds would be denied until the matter was resolved. Worse, the county had temporarily suspended the HOA's authority to manage the shared lake access points until a new oversight plan could be implemented. The irony. Teresa's obsession with controlling that shoreline had ultimately cost the HOA the right to manage it at all. One morning about 2 months after the federal probe began, I got a visit from someone unexpected. A man in his 60s, wearing a Parks and Water Authority badge on his windbreaker, pulled into my driveway. I met him halfway down the walk. "Mr. Pierce," he said, extending a hand. "My name's Ted. I'm with the county's water management team. I've been asked to review the HOA's history regarding lakefront management, particularly access designations." I nodded. "You want to see the dock, I take it." He followed me around the house, clipboard in hand. When we reached the fence, he paused and took a few photos. Then he pulled out a laminated parcel map. "This line here," he pointed, "matches the county's boundary records. We confirmed that last month." But what's interesting is the original plat filing. He showed me a scanned document from the developer who built the neighborhood. It clearly marked my lot as including exclusive shoreline access, no easements, no shared use. "This proves Teresa's claim about community access rights was fabricated," I said. Ted nodded. "More than that, it shows she attempted to override a recorded plat, which requires a formal replatting process. That's a Class C violation if done without public notice." I didn't ask what the punishment was. I didn't need to. Before he left, Ted handed me a form. "This is a declaration of private shoreline rights. You've got the documentation. File this with the county clerk, and no HOA now or in the future can challenge it without a full court order." I signed it that afternoon. By the time the federal trial began, Teresa's attorney had changed twice. Her original counsel dropped her after the second indictment. The new one tried for a plea deal, but the prosecution wouldn't budge. Too many forged documents, too much money gone, and not a single improvement made with the funds she stole. The trial lasted 7 days. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, there was no reaction from Teresa. She just stared straight ahead, hands folded in her lap. The sentence came 2 weeks later: 5 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, and full restitution of the misused funds. The judge ordered immediate seizure of her remaining assets, including the fraudulent Greenpoint account. Back home, the HOA got to work rebuilding. The board used reserve funds to hire a real contractor to finally repair the southern trail. Volunteers helped clear debris, replant grass, and install 2 benches facing the lake. A new sign went up beside the trailhead, Community Path, maintained by residents, open to all, owned by none. It felt right. That fall, the HOA held a barbecue, an honest-to-God, open invite, no agenda neighborhood event. People who hadn't spoken in years shared food, stories, and a few relieved laughs. Someone brought a cake shaped like a lake with a tiny wooden fence made of pretzels. Glenn didn't even try to hide his grin when he saw it. As the sun dipped below the trees, I stood near the fence that started it all. Kids ran across yards, dogs barked in the distance, and for the first time in a long while the place felt like home again. Not because we had rules. Because we'd finally learned how to protect each other from the people who abused them.